All my life I have observed a truth that few people dare to accept. Most of them don't really know anyone, not even themselves. We live surrounded by faces, by friendly gestures and carefully chosen words that seem to say something but basically say nothing. People get used to looking at the world through masks. He wears it to protect himself, to be accepted, not to be hurt. And over time he believes that this mask is his true face. But the soul does not show itself so easily. It is quiet, deep, and only reveals itself when something shakes it. That's why it's not enough to live with someone for years or share a whole life to really know them. The true nature of a person is not revealed when everything is going well, but when life becomes unpleasant, uncertain, or painful. I have known people who seemed noble and kind as long as life smiled at them. But a loss, a disappointment, or a small obstacle was enough for her apparent virtue to collapse. Kindness turned into anger, serenity into fear, understanding into judgment. Then I understood something crucial. A person's character is not shown in his appearance or in his words, but in his reaction to difficulties. The human soul is like crystal. It shines in the light, but its cracks are only visible when the pressure becomes too strong. Many believe they know themselves because they have read, thought, or experienced. But real self-knowledge does not arise in quiet moments. It arises when life pushes you against the wall, when pain frees you from everything you thought you were. In this moment of inner nakedness, your true face appears, and it is the same with others. You don't need years of analysis or endless conversations to recognize a person's character. Just watch how he reacts when things don't go his way anymore. This is the first sign of a real soul. As the pressure increases, the mask falls, and what emerges from within, whether compassion or cruelty, humility or pride, shows that person's level of consciousness. Because in the end, no one can pretend forever. The unconscious always finds a way to show itself, and when it does, it reveals with ruthless clarity who we really are. And before we go any further, if you feel that these thoughts touch you, then subscribe to the channel, give a like, and write in the comments what made you think the most. In Jungian philosophy, every word seeks to awaken something deep in your soul, and your participation keeps this inner search alive. I have already said that the true character of a person is not revealed on bright days, but when the storm begins to rage. And I don't mean that as a metaphor, but as a deep observation of the human soul. When the pressure comes, when something breaks inside you, the social masks, the learned manners, and the kind words disappear. Then it becomes clear what everyone has quietly built up in themselves. Some people become violent, impatient, or cruel under pressure. Others, on the other hand, reveal an unexpected calmness, a quiet strength that inspires and sustains others. It's not the difficulty that shapes the character, it's just the mirror that shows him. Because suffering does not invent anything new, it only brings to light what has always been there. I've seen men destroy what they loved because they couldn't stand frustration, and I have seen women who became sources of light in the midst of the deepest darkness. The trial by fire makes no difference. It only shows who you are when you can no longer pretend to be someone else. And therefore, when life oppresses you, when fate seems unjust, do not see it as a curse. See it as an opportunity to look at yourself without disguise, to discover how deep your inner center really is. Most people flee from difficult moments because they are afraid to see what lives inside them. But that's exactly when the soul holds out the most valuable mirror to you, the mirror of pain. This mirror does not lie, does not flatter, and does not hide anything. It shows you whether your compassion is genuine or just a facade, whether your patience is sincere or laziness, whether your faith is deep or just a superficial hope that shatters at the first gust of wind. Every reaction under pressure is a conversation between the ego and the unconscious. When you yell, judge, or attack, your shadow side has taken control. But if you manage to breathe, to listen, to understand without imposing yourself, then the soul begins to rule over the ego. I have learned that moments of tension are not punishment, but initiations. Fate always leads us into situations that reveal our inner truth. And when we have the humility to observe ourselves without defense, every trial becomes a step on the path to individuation, the silent path to the wholeness of being. Most people live behind a mask, not out of malice, but out of fear. Fear of being seen as they really are. Fear of judgment, fear of their own vulnerability. In this way, they create a social image that fits the expectations of the world. Friendly, reasonable, balanced. But this image is not the soul. It's just a suit we wear to survive on the surface of life. But at some point, life pushes us beyond our limits. Pressure, conflict, or loss begin to open cracks in the mask. Then the inner truth begins to penetrate to the outside. I have observed such moments. In the face of an angry person, in the trembling voice of a betrayed person, in the eyes of a person who can no longer pretend to be calm. In these seconds, the soul that has been silent for years speaks. Everything that has been suppressed, anger, pride, envy, fear, sooner or later seeks its expression. The shadow cannot be silenced forever. It can only be recognized, integrated, and accepted. When someone reaches their limits, the unconscious breaks out, often in painful or embarrassing ways. But this is not a moral failure, but an opportunity to discover truth. No one can heal what he does not acknowledge, and no one can know himself as long as he remains a slave to his mask. We live in a time when everyone wants to appear strong, successful, balanced. But tell me, what good is strength on the outside if you break inside? What's the point of feigning peace if you have a storm in your heart? True spiritual growth does not mean keeping the mask intact, but dropping it when it needs to break. Because only through this break does the real come into being. The soul does not grow through control, but through honesty with itself. When the inner pressure becomes too great, the shadow looks for a way out. In a harsh word, an impatient gesture, or in held-back tears. Even if these reactions are unpleasant, they are, in truth, messages from the unconscious, signs that something wants to be seen. So if you notice that you're reacting in a way you don't understand, that you're saying or doing something that surprises yourself, don't punish yourself. Look, ask yourself, which side of me is speaking right now, or what repressed emotion wants to show itself? This is the highest form of self-knowledge, to observe oneself at the very moment when the mask falls, without fleeing, without justifying oneself, without accusing the other. A mature soul is not the one who never loses control, but the one who understands what is behind the loss of control. This is exactly where the true inner change begins, because the fragility of the mask is not a mistake, but a memory. Authenticity can only come from vulnerability. It is only when the soul allows itself to be seen as it is, without defense and without adornment, that the process of individuation truly begins. The path to wholeness, where light and shadow no longer fight each other, but unite as parts of the same truth. There is a second, equally revealing way of recognizing a person's true character. It has nothing to do with his ideas, his education, or his appearance. It's about how he deals with those who can't give him anything in return. In all my years of observation, I have found that many people confuse politeness with kindness and diplomacy with empathy. They are friendly, yes, but only as long as they get something out of it: admiration, recognition, influence, or power. When the other is no longer of any use, their behavior becomes cold, distant, or even condescending. There the soul shows itself, not when you greet the powerful, but when you look at the humble. Not when you praise the one who admires you, but when you listen to the one the world overlooks. Your behavior toward the unseen one says more about you than any spiritual speech or public act. I have seen many men who thought they were good people while treating waiters condescendingly. and women who talked about compassion but ignored the cleaner's gaze. That's when I realized something frightening. The shadow shows itself most clearly in the small, everyday actions, not in big mistakes. Because as soon as someone feels superior, even for a moment, the ego takes control of the consciousness. And the ego cannot love. It can only use, calculate, and throw away. So if you want to know how developed someone really is, observe how they interact with people who have no power over them. There is no strategy, no interest, no calculation. Only what really resides in him. Respect or contempt, humility or arrogance, love or indifference. I remember a phrase that I often repeated in my writings. Whatever you do to another person, you do to yourself. Because the collective unconscious connects us beyond all appearances. Contempt for the other is always contempt for oneself, a projection of the unrecognized shadow. So when you condemn the weak or make fun of the service doer, you're really rejecting your own fragility. The part of you that's afraid of not being seen, not being enough, not being valuable. That is why I say, the way you deal with those who cannot be of any use to you is a sacred mirror. In this mirror, your true level of consciousness is revealed. There is no deception possible, because in this encounter, there is nothing that the ego can gain. A truly awakened soul does not distinguish between higher or lower, important or unimportant. She sees the other with the same eyes with which she sees herself, with respect, compassion, and the deep understanding that we are all part of the same invisible web of life. Treating people with dignity that the world overlooks is not an act of charity, but one of wisdom. For those who respect the small, the invisible and the silent, have understood the central secret of existence, that everything that exists has a soul, and that the true greatness of the spirit lies in the gestures that no one notices. Often, when someone despises another, he does not show his truth, but his shadow. I have observed that what we condemn most in others is usually what we do not want to accept in ourselves. Every time you unconsciously criticize someone else's weakness, you're talking about a part of yourself that you've repressed, denied, or banished to the unconscious. The shadow is not an enemy, as many believe. Rather, it is a sacred reservoir of everything that the consciousness does not dare to look at directly. There live your fears, your feelings of guilt, your desires, your primitive impulses, but also your unrecognized strength, your dormant creativity, your undeveloped courage. The shadow contains both darkness and potential, and the way we interact with others shows how aware we are of this inner duality. When someone humiliates, condemns, or despises others, he projects onto them what he cannot bear in himself. It's easier to say, "You're the problem," than it is to look inward and realize, "That lives in me too." In this way, man creates external enemies in order not to have to face his own inner chaos. But every judgment, every pejorative gesture, every hurtful word is an unconscious confession. The soul always shows itself, even if it wants to hide. That's why the way you treat people you consider inferior says nothing about them, but everything about you. Those who have to feel superior are driven by an inner wound, the fear of being worth nothing, of not being seen, of appearing weak. In truth, pride is only a mask that hides deep insecurity, and contempt for others is just the shadow trying to compensate for its own sense of smallness. When I talk about the process of individuation, that's exactly what I mean. Making peace with your shadow, no longer projecting it onto others, and looking at yourself so honestly that you can say, "Yes, that's me too." This moment of realization is not easy. No one wants to face their darkest corners, but that's exactly where the true gold of the soul lies. I have learned there is no light without shadow and no consciousness without darkness. Pretending to be only good is a subtle form of untruth. A complete soul does not fear its dark part, because it knows that only those who integrate it will become truly free. When you accept your shadow, you stop humiliating, judging, or putting yourself above others. You understand that we all share the same invisible struggles. The man who has made peace with his shadow no longer needs power, no shine, no proof. He walks calmly, speaks modestly, and listens empathetically, because he knows that the darkness he sees in the other could also be his own. This realization transforms the gaze into compassion. Every encounter with another person is in truth an encounter with yourself. The unconscious uses every relationship to show you what you haven't yet integrated into yourself. That's why any person who irritates you, annoys you, or stirs you up emotionally is a messenger from your soul who tells you, look, there's something inside you that you haven't seen before. True inner work does not mean fighting or eliminating the shadow, but bringing it into the light of consciousness, talking to it, looking at it without fear or judgment. Only in this way can you achieve real spiritual maturity. The shadow is not the enemy. The enemy is your refusal to see it. As long as you flee from him, he will control your life out of the dark. But if you embrace him with understanding, without justifying or rejecting him, you realize that there is no monster. It's just a part of you that wants to be seen. Nothing that remains in the dark can be transformed. Only that which is grasped by the light of consciousness has the possibility of redemption. That's why working with the shadow is not about fighting it or denying it, but about looking at it consciously, without judgment, without fear, without shame. True inner growth doesn't start when you try to be better, but when you dare to really look, even at what you don't like. Consciousness, when used honestly, has tremendous healing power. There is no need for violence, no control, only clarity. The simple act of lovingly looking at the unconscious is already transformation. The problem is, we have learned to judge ourselves. We live caught between guilt and ideal. We want to be good, spiritual, correct. And in doing so, we deny half of our being. But what is repressed does not disappear. It becomes stronger. Everything you deny dominates you. Everything you acknowledge sets you free. Therefore, if you feel an unpleasant emotion, anger, envy, jealousy, resentment, do not suppress it. Stop, breathe, look at her like a confused child. Ask yourself, what is this emotion trying to tell me? What part of me wants to be seen? This question opens the door to consciousness, because every emotion carries a symbolic meaning. She wants to show you what your mind has forgotten. Remember, awareness is not control, but understanding. It's not about mastering what you feel, but about mindfully accompanying it. Only in this way does the unconscious lose its destructive power. What you see clearly ceases to control you. What you repress controls you from the shadows. I have met people who for years blamed others for their wounds. They said, "My pain comes from my childhood," or "My frustration is the fault of others." While these stories may be true, as long as you stay in victim mode, you remain a prisoner of your unconscious. Consciousness does not look for culprits, it seeks understanding. When you recognize the origin of your pain without condemning it, without nourishing it, without using it as an excuse, that pain turns into wisdom. The antidote to the shadow is not oppression, struggle, denial, but loving awareness, a kind of inner gaze that does not condemn and does not gloss over, but observes with respect, like someone who looks at a fire and knows that it will either burn or illuminate depending on how it is handled. And this conscious observation requires courage, courage to stop running away from yourself. Courage, that's what you need to stop distracting yourself with guilt or excuses. Courage to sit in front of your own soul and say, "I am ready to see you as you are." When you reach this point, something quiet happens within you. You stop reacting automatically, stop blaming others, and begin to understand that every experience, even the most painful, has come to show you a part of your own truth. I have realized a truly conscious person does not become harder, but softer, not because it loses its values, but because it gains depth. He judges less, is less moralistic, less severe. He no longer sees only the behavior, but the hidden pain behind it. He understands that mistakes also arise from unconsciousness. And it is precisely this understanding that produces compassion. Not sentimental, but a clear, calm compassion that comes from the soul. Because those who have seen their own darkness no longer have to condemn the darkness of others. Awareness is the greatest act of love you can give yourself. Loving does not mean denying your mistakes, but accepting them with understanding. Looking at yourself without masks, without pretending you're perfect. Only from this honesty can real change arise. And when you begin to live with awareness, life itself becomes your teacher. Every encounter, every conflict, every emotion becomes an opportunity to get to know you better, to return again and again to your silent inner center, where there is no verdict and no defense, only pure observation. This is where the process of individuation begins, the union of the conscious and the unconscious, the reconciliation between what you show and what you hide. And only then, does the soul begin to shine with its true light, a light that needs no confirmation, seeks no reward, because it comes from the deepest self-understanding. Often man believes that he is the absolute master of his character. He thinks he can determine who he is, what he shows, how he reacts. He clings to the idea that his personality is something fixed, logical, unchangeable. But this is an illusion, carefully built up by the ego. The ego needs control. It wants to believe that it has what is happening under control, but the psychological reality is much deeper and much more chaotic than we would like to admit. Behind every kind gesture there can be an unconscious intention. Behind every smile is a repressed desire or fear that seeks recognition. So if we judge someone only by their good manners or perfect words, we only see the mirror of their mask. This mask, the persona, is the social dress we all wear to go through the world without being completely exposed. It is not fundamentally bad. Without them, we would be at the mercy of the judgments of others. The problem arises when people confuse themselves with their mask, when they lose contact with what lives behind it. That's where the discrepancy between what someone says and what they really are begins. People who pride themselves on their morality, purity, or spiritual strength often try to hide an aspect of their dark side that they can't bear. The more they deny him, the more he expresses himself unconsciously, in a look of contempt, a gesture of impatience, a harsh word against someone who cannot defend himself. If you want to know someone's true character, you have to learn to see beyond the action. Not just what someone does, but how their energy vibrates in the process. There is an invisible tension, a subtle discrepancy between what someone shows and what they really radiate. This is the line through which truth is revealed. When someone acts from the soul, he doesn't need any effort, no show. His compassion flows from a quiet, real place where there is no calculation and no need for recognition. However, when he acts from his mask, even his goodness becomes a tool, a means of gaining approval, of preserving his image, of controlling others. Therein lies one of the greatest lessons of self-knowledge. We observe others not only to understand them, but also to recognize ourselves in them. Every time we condemn someone else's falsehood or harshness, a part of us invites us to see our own dark side. As I often say, what you deny dominates you. What you accept transforms you. So if you want to see the true character of a person, observe not only his deeds, but the invisible energy that carries them. We often believe that character is revealed in big decisions, heroic moments, or brilliant words, but in truth it reveals itself in the quiet moments, in the small gestures in which the soul unintentionally exposes itself. If a person does not try to impress, if he lowers the guard of his ego and is simple, then his truth is revealed. How he listens without interrupting, how he reacts to contradiction, how patient he is with the awkwardness of others, how mindfully he treats what does not belong to him. All these small actions are like X-rays of his essence. The true character does not scream, does not seek attention. It shows itself in calmness, in respect, in the agreement of thought, feeling, and acting. And it is precisely in this silence that the shadow has the least power to manipulate the image, because when the ego is silent, the soul speaks. I've observed all my life that words can be deceiving, but unconscious gestures can never. A quick look, a sigh, a small change in tone of voice or posture can say more than 1,000 promises. It is in these tiny, almost invisible moments that the mask cracks and the inner being shines through. If we look closely, we can see something even deeper. People who live from their inner center radiate a special peace, a presence that does not have to impose itself. Their mere presence conveys confidence without them saying a word. But those who are torn between the desire to represent something and the fear of being exposed spread a subtle restlessness, an uneasiness that we cannot explain but clearly feel. The human psyche can never lie completely. It can camouflage itself, yes, but never completely hide its vibration. Therefore, when you meet someone in silence, pay attention to how you feel. The energy he triggers in you is often the most honest language of his soul. True silence becomes a mirror. It reflects inner peace, balance, and true compassion. A forced or uncomfortable silence, on the other hand, betrays tension, guilt, or the need to hide something. And that's exactly where the true character shows itself again. In my studies of the unconscious, I have come to understand that the soul expresses itself not only through words or dreams, but also through the body, through pauses, through the gaze. Everything about people speaks, even what he tries to conceal. So if you really want to get to know someone, don't just listen with your ears, look with your soul. Pay attention to what remains unspoken, to what the body reveals when the ego is silent. Because in the end, the truth of a person does not lie in what he says, but in the way he is there, as he is present in the world. We have traveled a path that invites us to look beyond the obvious, beyond words, beyond gestures, beyond external forms. We have learned that a person's true character is not revealed in easy days, but in difficult ones, not in a smile in agreement, but in his reaction to frustration and pain, not in his kindness to those who benefit him, but in his compassion for those who have nothing to give him. If you want to know a person's soul, look at these two mirrors, the pressures that challenge him and the small actions towards the invisible ones. There you will find the truth of his nature, without masks, without excuses. But there is an even deeper secret. While you are attentively observing others, you are also meeting yourself. Every look, every reaction of the others is a mirror of your own shadows, your fears, your inner resistances and untapped potentials. Learning to observe without judgment reveals not only the truth of others, but also the truth within you, because the soul that dares to see the shadow in the other without condemning him begins to make peace with his own. Thus, the final test of character is not a test of morality or external goodness. It is a call to self-knowledge and inner integration. Those who observe honestly learn to distinguish between what is real and what is only superficial. And in this recognition, consciousness, humility, and compassion grow. So allow yourself to look beyond the appearance, to listen beyond the words, to feel beyond the gestures. Learn to discover not only the truth of others, but also the truth that resides within you. Remember, what you do when no one is watching you and how you treat those who have nothing to offer you shows who you really are. May these words not remain fleeting thoughts, but a silent guide to a life in authenticity. Because life gives us the opportunity in every moment to recognize our shadow, to awaken our consciousness, and to discover our deepest being. Look, observe, reflect, and allow the truth to show itself in you and through you.